As we're getting this review party started, I just want to shout out my Sunday movie video. I posted the week 2 recap of my 365 movie challenge. There was a little bit of confusion down in the comments. I think people thought I was watching Street Fighter movies based on the video game from the 90s. It's not that. It's the old Sonny Chiba 70s kung fu films and Sister Street Fighter, which came out immediately afterwards. So if that's something that interests you, please go check it out. It was a lot of fun watching through those movies. It was a 7-day marathon, 7 different films, so go check it out. As for this week's Batman titles, there were 6 new books. I picked up 5. I did not pick up Batman the Knight, written by Chip Zdarsky. I might regret not getting that. I really like Chip Zdarsky's run in Batman Urban Legends, but I'm gonna wait. It's one of those I'll probably just pick it up when all 10 issues are out and I can just snag them all up on eBay for cheap. As for the titles I did pick up, I picked up one non-continuity book, which was Batman vs. Bigby. We are now on issue 5. This is one where after the first couple issues, I kind of let it start stacking up. So I'm excited to go back and read this from the beginning once it's complete. But I've really enjoyed what I've read so far. Definitely recommend picking it up. The other 4 books I picked up were in continuity. The first one being Robins, part 3 of 6. Still picking this up because I'm a glutton for punishment. Next up is Nightwing 88, which I didn't review issue 87 because it was during my December hiatus, but a strong recommendation for that issue that I'll just plug really quick now. It was kind of a gimmick book, but it was really entertaining. The whole issue is just one giant panel that if you could lay it all out, it would literally just be a 20-page spread. If you didn't pick it up, it's well worth it as a great hopping on point. Kind of feels like a one and done. I'm super excited to find out where things go with issue 88. Next up, since I kind of realized I'm going in reverse alphabetical order today for some reason, I got Batman Detective Comics. This is issue 1049, almost up to issue 1050, which is going to be a big anniversary issue. We are now on part 3 of the Arkham Tower storyline. Super excited to dig into this one. The one problem with this book being weekly is I definitely sound like a broken record because I sing its praises every week. Alright, and then the last book is the title that I'm honestly the most nervous to read. It's Catwoman Issue 39. New creative team on this book, new direction. I'm just not done with the old direction that they were going in. I really loved the creative team on this, and it felt like it was just getting going. They kicked off their run at the same time as Nightwing. And, you know, with Nightwing, it really feels like we're starting Act 2 of that creative team's run, whereas this one has been kind of cut down at the knees, but I am certainly open to seeing where a new creative team can take this title. They just have really big shoes to fill. Alright guys, so I finished reading through my books. I've organized these from least favorite to most favorite. So what did I think of this week's Batman continuity? So bottom of the barrel this week has to go to Robins, issue 3 of 6. I've decided I am going to finish this read out. After issue 2, I was like, but am I just going to let this book go? But now I'm halfway done and it feels like... The thing is, there's enough intriguing about this book that I do kind of want to know what happens. It's just the way it's executed feels so trite. So in this book, you basically have a Robin-centric story. You get to see all the Robins together on this adventure in which the big revelation is that there is another Robin. A Robin that existed before Dick Grayson that has now come back to exact revenge. At least that's the premise of the story. And there's just not enough information there to sustain 6 issues. Like, you could probably get through this story arc in 3 and call it a day. But instead, they're kind of teasing things out. So in the first issue, you found out at the very end of the issue that this Robin existed. And then in the second issue, you get to find out kind of about each of the Robin's trials in which Batman decided, yes, you're good enough to be Robin. And some of those vignettes were kind of nice, but at the end of the issue, it promises, okay, now you've unlocked the ability to find out what's up with this original Robin in issue 3. And instead, we don't get that. Instead, we just get more farting around with, you know, the current roster of Robins. And the big revelation at the end of this is basically Tim Drake kind of flies off the handle and acts completely out of character, and it causes the entire Robin team to kind of splinter apart. Big surprise, it wasn't actually Tim Drake, it was this new Robin in disguise. Yeah. Like, there's just nothing surprising about this book, but it's got an interesting premise, and it's just too bad. Like, if they could have done this in 3 issues, I think there might have been a good story here. As it is, we're halfway through a 6-issue arc, and I'll find out what happens and let you guys know if there's anything interesting to come of it, but right now, this is just bottom of the barrel for me. Okay, so for the next 3 books, they're all ones that I enjoyed. Although the one that was kind of lower on the list definitely was Catwoman 39. And what can I say? It's tough because it is coming off of what I thought was a really good run. I've never really given ongoing Catwoman books the time of day. And so when I hopped on with Infinite Frontier, it just was kind of at a great moment because Ram V was on the book and he was just starting his run. And so, like, of course it was going to be above average for your typical Catwoman. Reading this, honestly, it just kind of felt more like what I would expect a Catwoman book to read like. Which isn't to say that it was bad, it was just not as good as what came before. So the big push in this is Catwoman is back in Gotham City because Gotham City is the core of where all the corruption is coming from that spills into Alleytown. So I guess that's a fair enough framework for them to build off a new ongoing arc in this Catwoman title. Although it does feel thin. Like, this book doesn't do a good enough job of telling you why that previous arc was well and truly over. Probably the highlight of this book for me was the art. I did like the art overall, and there's some great sort of shimmer effects overlaid on, we've got this cat here, which was kind of a cool effect. I thought it looked nice. And then the way they illustrate Catwoman in her cat suit, and the use of whites to kind of establish the shine on her leather, was pretty arresting, although at other times the use of pink in this I thought was just kind of tacky. So even though I like the art overall, the coloring kind of brings it down a notch. It's kind of 50-50 depending on what part of the book you're kind of steeped in. I will say it's relevant to the storytelling because the book bounces around and so the color palette kind of shifts depending on what point in time in the story you're in, but it was overkill. It didn't really need it. I understood just fine without having those color cues to kind of guide me along. But once you get to, you know, out into the city and it's just Catwoman among the streets, you know, the lighting effects I thought were good. And those parts of the book, to me, read really nice. I have a lot of thoughts on Tini Howard's direction she's taking Catwoman as a character and kind of the philosophical bent that this story is going on, but I am going to reserve those thoughts until we're a couple more issues in, because this is just part 1 of this new arc, and I want to give the story time to breathe. I will say, so far, it's not as strong of an interpretation of the character to me as Ram V's was, but let's give it some time. I'm going to hold my tongue for now, and by the time this 4-issue arc wraps up, I'll lay that all out depending on where I kind of finally fall on it. Okay, so the book coming in at my number 2 slot, barely, just barely, is going to be Batman Detective Comics. Why don't I give this the number 1? I'm actually, even as I'm looking at it, I'm not even sure. So kicking things off with the art, I think the art's great. We've got Ivan Reese for the 3rd issue in a row, which is awesome. Like, it's so great that they had 3 to 4 issues lined up for him just right out the gate. I don't know if he's running all 12. I would be kind of surprised if he was, but what a treat. Ivan Reese is one of those artists where, like, he's gone from, you know, being a hot artist to just being god tier for me. Like, I just think he's so solid and so consistent. and you just know that when he's presenting you something, it's going to be quality. I've particularly been getting a lot of enjoyment out of watching him illustrate Batwoman. Like, part of what's great about this book is, since Batman's largely not in it, you're getting to see him flex his muscles on, you know, the supporting cast, and watching him illustrate them is really a treat, I think. Now, as for the story, I guess the primary reason this one's my number 2 instead of my number 1 is just because not a ton happened in the story here. The story does move forward incrementally, in the sense that, you know, the Bat family is starting to get a little bit clearer picture of what Dr. Ware is up to. But it's not necessarily anything really revelatory beyond what we sort of already knew and suspected. There definitely seems to be a twist coming. It just hasn't arrived yet. And I think this is maybe the issue where it should have. Because right now it just feels a little bit like, ooh, I hope there's more here. Because right now it's a bit predictable. Probably the highlight of the main story in this is finding out what's up with Huntress, because she is an inmate at Arkham Tower right now, undercover, and she seems to be affected by whatever it is that's affecting the rest of the Bat family. And it takes a really dark turn towards the end of the book, when you find out, you know, some of the terrible things that are happening in Arkham Tower after the lights go out. But as awful as it is, it's somewhat of a side tangent to what seems to be ultimately going on in the tower. So it's just hard to say right now. Now, of course, since it's Detective Comics, we are continuing the story of House of Gotham, which they have finally corrected on the cover. It's now called House of Gotham as opposed to House of Wayne. And even though Detective Comics is my second favorite book overall this week, House of Gotham was my favorite story that I read out of everything this week. I love Fernando Blanco's artwork. It's great having him here coming off of Catwoman. And the story takes some interesting turns. So, like, this kid has been exposed now to so much of Gotham's underbelly, and I'm really eager to find out where this kid is going to end up by the time this House of Gotham storyline wraps up. In the first story, his family was killed by the Joker. Batman intervened too late. And then in the second story, he has this weird sort of child playtime with Clayface that was very interesting and bizarre. And then now in the third issue, he's exposed to fear toxin and the Scarecrow. So far, Scarecrow way more interesting in here than he was in Fear State, fun fact. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff going on here. There's a really interesting power dynamic between the lead child and the rest of the kids in the orphanage, because the kid is getting preferential treatment by Bruce Wayne, and so he kind of has a hatred for Bruce Wayne. He also has a hatred for Batman, but he has this really dubious relationship with the rest of Batman's rogues gallery. And Matthew Rosenberg does a really good job of making sure you understand where he's at emotionally and relating to the decisions that the character is making. So part 4 promises to be really interesting. Probably going to be a major turning point in the story, and can't wait to read it. Okay, so then that leaves my pick of the week as Nightwing 88. And the reason this was my favorite book over Detective Comics really just boiled down to the fact that this was just a fun read. Coming off of the heels of a really, really fun issue with issue 87. Issue 87 feels like a standalone issue, and I kind of forgot that it was technically part 1. So with part 2, we get to really dig back into where the rest of the characters are at. What's up with the Zucco daughter, what's up with Blockbuster, and what's up with Heartless, who has been largely ignored through the majority of Tom Taylor's run. And there's actually a piece of graffiti on a wall somewhere in issue 87 that says, "Who is Heartless?" which was kind of a great tease and a reminder to the audience that Tom Taylor hasn't forgotten Heartless. And sure enough, with issue 88, he's finally back. So I'm excited to find out in future issues what's up with that character. The art, as usual, in this book is on point. Bruno Redondo does a fantastic job. I think Bruno Redondo and Tom Taylor are one of those creative teams that just, you know, it's like Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. They just have a way of working together that works fantastic. As for the inner workings of the story itself, as you can probably see as I've been flipping around, it's largely a Teen Titans story, which is a lot of fun to see. As we found out in issue 87, Blockbuster has a contract out on Dick Grayson's life. And so in the course of Dick Grayson's quest to create a better Gotham with Alfred's inheritance, they're all quick to stand with him and support him in that mission. And so it's just great to have all those characters together. The banter in this is very solid. It fits with the Teen Titans that I know, and it's a fun read on its own. And again, that's really why this was my favorite read, was because it was fun. Not because it was the most earth-shattering story, but because the art was on point, the writing of the characters was spot on, and it just put a smile on my face while I was reading it. So if you're not picking up Nightwing, go back and get issue 87. It's a great hopping on point with a fun gimmick, and you can pick right up with issue 88 and have a fun time. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed finding out what happened this week in Batman with me. And be sure to let me know down in the comments what you picked up. Are there any Batman books you're reading? I would love to hear your thoughts. Definitely a few stinkers out there to be sure, but I've been enjoying the ride. So be sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and I hope you guys have a great week in comics. Thanks for watching.